that. To Mal then. Hi, Mal. How are you today?
I'm great, Julia. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks, Mal. Is this issue of bank branches closing just an older people's issue?
No, it's not, actually. It's far bigger than that. It's part of a trend in the world of business generally, the automation of all things customer-related. I mean, one of the major lessons we should have learned during the pandemic was that a growing engagement with high-tech always requires a greater commitment to high touch. Human beings thrive on social interaction, especially when we have a problem. And there's a lot of talk at the moment, and I've done a lot of interviews on the Beeb about artificial intelligence and chatbots and so on. They're all good, but many banks and businesses rely on them as a cheap alternative to real customer service. People need to feel they can face up to a human being who will actually empathise with their situation. Machines, by definition, can't show real empathy because they don't have a shared human experience. So banks might rely on automation, in the argument for hubs, for example, but people still need people at the end of the day.
Mm. And we need people for well-being. Is that the biggest argument? That actually, and particularly when we have a problem, that we are more likely to be able to cope with the problem, relate to the problem, solve the problem if another human being helps us with it?
Yes, because machines, and they're getting more and more sophisticated by the month at the moment, AI and AGI machines can certainly fake empathy. They can appear to understand what we're saying and feel what we're saying, but we still know that it's a machine, that there's not a human being who has anything like our shared human experience. And what concerns me is that banks and other businesses don't seem to understand is that they can't survive without public trust. And trust is linked to accountability, which is the willingness to front up and be seen. So the whole problem with banking hubs is partly a product of banks pushing for a fully cashless society. That favours banks more than it does consumers. It's an issue of technology, but it's more than that. There are advantages, of course, with cashless spending. We all use it. But there are some big downsides too, and not least for the elderly. For all of its messiness, cash has weight. You can feel it leaving your pocket. So we have a growing problem today with digital debt throughout society because with cashless systems, we spend more but think less before we spend. And look, let's not forget a fair proportion of people in this country who are considered poor have little or no access to the internet, even if they have a bank account. So if there are no physical banking centres, I think Caroline already touched on this, where do the tech have-nots go for their money? So it's an issue that's bigger than banking hubs, I think.
And there definitely is one of those intersections here, isn't there, of age and poverty, that those probably most affected by this will be either poor themselves or living in a more deprived area and elderly.
Yeah, I think that's true. But again, I think that the rest of us shouldn't be too smug about it.
Okay.
There's a problem, for example, about data outages. With all things digital, you've got to have access to the digital equipment, to the internet in our case. So in March of a couple of years ago, 2020, 4 of our biggest phone providers went down for 5 hours and millions of people couldn't access their bank accounts. So what happens to things like important travel plans or important banking information when the whole system goes down even for an hour?
Okay. So there's a resilience question, isn't there, of how we as individuals, but also the systems are resilient. And actually, can they be if they can go down for such long periods of time?
Exactly right. And the issue of data generation. Every time we spend money using cashless, for example, we're generating data on us. And it may only be for that merchant, but we have no control over what happens to it next. We don't know what picture it's building up about our preferences and even our bank account numbers and so on. So I'm not being dystopian about this. I think we can use it in very positive ways, but we need to have open discussions about it. And we need for big businesses like banks to be more accountable in their use of technology.
I'm interested in your use of the word dystopia because one of the last questions I wanted to ask you, I love the idea of being a futurist. I love the idea of that being in your title. Are you by nature optimistic about the future?
Well, I get asked that a bit, and I think I'm optimistic in the sense of the original use of the word. I studied this word a few years ago. When the word came to us from the French language in about the 1700s, it didn't mean what we think it does today. Optimism didn't mean glass half full. It actually meant realism with a dash of positivity. So it's sort of glass half empty but could be full. So in that sense, I am an optimist. I'm a realist who says, well, we can make decisions that shape things, that change things. We could end up with a bad outcome in one area or another, or we could create something quite positive with it if we think about what we're doing. The challenge is, Julia, a lot of the time, like banks are doing at the moment, we rush into the whiz-bang of technology without thinking about the ethics thereof or the way it will affect human beings.
You might want to talk to the head of the BBC about those issues too.
I would love to.
We all would, if we could get our hands on him. Thank you so much. I love glass half full, but it could be glass half empty, but it could be refilled. I mean, if there's still some Sauvignon left in the fridge, then that's always the case, isn't it? Thanks, Mal. Great to have you on the show. Have a super day, won't you?
You too, Julia.
Mal Fletcher. He is a futurist and a social commentator. Tell me about your life